So there are two primary types of studies we're going to be talking about here, observational and experiments. We'll start with observational. Now, the key to understanding what observational study is to understand that it's got a root word, and that is, it's based on observation. The key here is an observational study means you don't control anything. You don't get to force people to do anything. You don't get to assign them to certain groups. It's literally just observation-based. And for this reason, the most important thing you can take out of this section is that there's no causation. That is, the majority of studies we're going to be looking at, or that you'll see actually in everyday life, are observational. And because you have no control, there's no way to conclude without a doubt that one thing causes the other. We'll talk about benefits and some of the other shortfalls of observational studies after we introduce experiments as well. But for now, let's go ahead and break observational studies down into a couple different categories. So to begin with, we can think of ourselves as standing here in the present moment, and there's a couple of places we could go from here. One, we could follow people into the future. This is what's called a prospective study. In a prospective study, we look at people as they travel through time. So, like what happens now, what happens in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and so forth. Now, prospective study might follow a neighborhood. That is, how is the neighborhood changing over time? But by the same vein, we could follow the exact same group. This is actually what was done in what is called the nurses study, which is an excellent example of what a prospective study can do. The nurses study actually started in 1976, and it looked at about 121,000 nurses in the U.S. It asked them questions based on things like their diet, how much exercise they did, their career goals, if they smoked, if they took birth control, if they drank. And they looked at how all those factors intersected over time and changed. It's actually given us some of the most important information we have in the medical industry today. It shows us relationships between, let's say, smoking cigarettes and the fact that that actually can increase the risk of colon cancer, while taking birth control can actually decrease that risk. So the nursing study is something definitely to check out. The nurses study is a specific example of a prospective study called a longitudinal study. It's called a longitudinal study because it follows the same group of people over time. That is, the same people are asked questions over and over and over again. So it's not just a neighborhood or a city or a business, it's a specific group of people here that we're looking at. Now, a prospective study is super useful because it has high accuracy. And it has high accuracy because we're making measurements in real time. That is, when you come in, I can ask you your weight. I can ask you what you've eaten or drank this week. Now, the cons to this, the downfalls, is that it takes a lot of time. That is, the nurses study, once again, enormously important in the medical industry, has been going on for a very, very long time, and it's taken all that time to get good data. So it's expensive in terms of time, it's also expensive in terms of money, because you have to incentivize people to keep participating in things a lot of times. I want to be clear, though, the nurses study doesn't do that. So, pros, high accuracy, cons, it's a lot of time commitment here. Now, in contrast to a prospective study is what we call a retrospective study. A retrospective study does basically the opposite. That is, if we visualize ourselves as standing right here in the present, a retrospective study looks backwards. That is, right now I go out and ask people about events that have happened in their past, about behaviors or habits they had when they were younger. So retrospective looks, once again, towards the past. A good example of this would be studies that happened in the late 2000s, early 2010s, which looked at whether or not breastfeeding was related to the IQ of a child. So, breastfeeding and IQ. So what researchers did is they went out and they found mothers of 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old children, and then they asked them, how long did you breastfeed for? And they used that data and an IQ test on the children to try and find a relationship between these two variables. This is retrospective because they went out and asked mothers of older children, how long in the past did you breastfeed for? Now, there are advantages and some shortcomings of this type of study. So let's talk about advantages first. A really good advantage is that it takes very little time to do this type of study. That is, they went out, they found the mothers, they asked them the questions, and they immediately had data off of it. They didn't have to wait for the children to grow up or the mothers to stop breastfeeding to get the information they wanted. So time is an advantage in retrospective studies versus prospective studies. The shortcoming, though, is pretty significant, and that is accuracy. That is, if I go out and I ask a mother, well, how long did you breastfeed for 6-7 years ago, she might not know to the exact day. And even the accuracy that she remembers, she might round it or approximate it when she reports it. So time is on your side if you're doing retrospective, accuracy is on your side if you're doing prospective studies. Now, I really want to emphasize here that while retrospective and prospective studies are types of observational studies and they have their separate pros and cons, the really big overarching thing you have to take out of observational studies is, once again, there is absolutely no causation. That is, while we can go ahead and draw parallels, that, for instance, we might say that it looks like breastfed babies in this case had higher or lower IQs. We can in no way feel justified in claiming that overall, of course, breastfeeding does this or this. An observational study lacks control, which means causation is off the table for us.